I was driving back from a long court session in the city when I saw the mess from the distance. My truck slowed to a crawl, tires crunching over loose gravel as I stared in disbelief. The old wooden bridge, the same bridge that had been on my family's land for 3 generations, was gone, completely gone. All that remained were splintered planks scattered across the banks of the narrow river, some half submerged, some already drifting downstream. I jumped out of the truck and ran forward, boots sliding in the dirt. The bridge wasn't just a pathway, it was a symbol. It was built by my grandfather, repaired by my father, and restored under my watch. Even more important, it was registered as a historical structure and marked, protected under federal preservation laws, and now it was gone, a bright orange sign flapped in the wind nearby. On it, the HOA's logo, Lakeside Ridge Association, was plastered boldly with a smug note underneath: unauthorized structure removed for community safety, LRA Compliance Division. My hands shook. As I pulled out my phone, I took pictures from every angle, documented the damage, and tried to keep calm. They didn't just mess with the bridge, they messed with a federal judge, and they had no idea. But wasn't going to reveal my card, yet I had a plan, one that would make them wish. They never touched that bridge. As I stood there, the river rushing behind me, a familiar voice called from behind, "Hey, Judge, you all right?" It was Martin, my ranch hand, and longtime friend. He'd seen it too. "Who did this?" he asked, glancing at the mess. "Looks like a tornado hit it." "The HOA," said coldly. Martin's eyes widened. "The same HOA that told you last month they had no interest in your land." I nodded. "And now this? But they don't know who they're dealing with." "I didn't mean that in a prideful way. I meant it literally. They didn't know. They thought I was just another rancher out here in the outskirts, someone with cattle and dirt under their fingernails, not someone who sat in a federal court in a black robe and had contacts in every corner of the justice system. But I wasn't going to pull rank yet, not until it hurt earlier. That week I'd already sensed something was off. A few strangers had been walking the boundary of my land, some in polos and khakis, clipboards in hand. I thought maybe they were surveyors, maybe developers, but I'd brushed it off now. I knew better. Martin helped me gather the loose boards. We didn't talk much. The silence between us was heavy. The bridge was gone, and I couldn't even cross the creek to get to the other half of my property without it. Later that evening, I walked into the Lakeside Ridge HOA office. It was a polished building, far too shiny for a rural area, like this glass doors, stone veneer, and a fountain in the front that always seemed to be broken inside. The receptionist gave me a bored look. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to speak to whoever authorized the removal of the bridge on my ranch," I said. She blinked slowly. "And you are?" "Judge Carter," I replied. Still no reaction. She tapped something on her screen. "You're not listed as a member of the HOA, sir. I know I never joined, and my land isn't part of this subdivision. That bridge wasn't on HOA property." She looked confused now, but before she could say anything, a tall, balding man stepped out from the back office. His name tag read Ed Branson, HOA Vice President. "Is there a problem, sir?" Ed asked, stepping forward. I turned to him, cool as ever. "Yes, Ed, like to know why your organization tore down a historic structure on federally registered private land." He gave a short laugh. "That rickety thing, it was a danger. We received complaints from homeowners about the appearance, said it looked unsafe. Our compliance team took initiative." "Did you file a complaint with the county, with the state, with the Federal Preservation Office?" I asked. Ed shrugged. "Didn't think it was necessary. Thought we were doing the area a favor." "You weren't," I said flatly, "and you just made a massive legal mistake." Scoffed. "Look, if it's about some permit, I'm sure we can work it out. But frankly, judge or not, if you're in our community, I'm not." I cut him off. "My ranch sits outside your jurisdiction. Always has, always will." The receptionist looked up, eyes Why now she was beginning to understand, but Ed was too arrogant to notice. He smiled smugly and crossed his arms. Well, maybe it's time your property became part of the community. I stared at him. So that was it. This wasn't about the bridge. It was about power expansion. Control. They wanted to absorb my land into their HOA to boost their profile and increase fees. He thought this was a game, but I had an entire playbook they'd never read that night. I called my contact at the U.S. Department of the Interior. The bridge had been on the protected registry for over 20 years. There were records, inspections reports, even a local article from the 90s about its heritage they'd torn down. Federally protected landmark without notice, without paperwork, and on land that didn't belong to them. It was a federal offense. The wheels were now in motion, but I still didn't show my hand to Ed or the HOA. The next day I parked my truck at the edge of the property, right where the bridge used to stand. I started putting up caution tape and signs that read, "Crime Scene Federal Property." Martin came up behind me, laughing under his breath. "You're serious about this?" "'Cause a heart attack." We spent the rest of the day setting up trail cams, motion detectors, and signs, not to catch vandals, but to build evidence, because I knew Aid wasn't done, and I was right. 2 days later, at around midnight, I was reviewing case files in my home office when I got a notification on my phone. One of the trail cams had triggered. Someone was on my land. I opened the app and watched in real time as 3 men in dark clothes tiptoed across the creek bed, flashlights low. They were looking at the new signs. One of them kicked one over another, started taking pictures. They were gathering proof to claim the land was public or abandoned. I dialed Martin. "It over here. We've got trespassers." We rode out in my ATV with the lights off, coasting silently through the trees. The night was cold, the air sharp, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves under our tires. When we crept close, I spotted them. 2 of the men were scribbling notes. The third was placing flags along the ground. They were trying to map my land. I flicked on the ATV's headlights. They froze like deer. One of them dropped his clipboard and ran the zoom. Other 2 tried to act like they were just lost. I didn't say a word, just snapped photos. Then I said the one thing that made their faces go white: "You're trespassing on federally protected property." They stammered, fumbled with excuses, and then ran. Martin chuckled. They picked the wrong ranch. The next morning I printed the photos, put them in a neat file, added timestamps, included the HOA memo from their bridge demolition. I was preparing a legal ambush that would hit them harder than they ever imagined. But just as I was sealing the envelope for my federal contacts, there was a loud boom from the back of my ranch. Something had exploded. Smoke started rising. Martin burst into my office, face pale. "They blew up your shed." I jumped to my feet and grabbed my boots, and that's when I realized this wasn't just a land dispute anymore. This was war. By the time I reached the back of the ranch, the flames were already dancing high into the night sky. The old wooden shed, nothing fancy, just a place kept spare tools, fencing wire, and feed, was completely engulfed. The smoke was thick and bitter, and the scent of burning chemicals hung in the air. Martin ran ahead of me with a fire extinguisher, but it was useless. The shed was gone. I grabbed the hose by the barn, but even as we sprayed water toward the blaze, we both knew it was too late. Someone had blown it up, not knocked it over, not burned it down by accident, blown it up. There were scorch marks in the dirt and a shattered metal gas can lying yards away. Whoever did this had used fuel, maybe fireworks, or even worse. And they wanted to send a message, but the only thing they'd managed to do was pour gasoline on a legal wildfire they couldn't control. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed up and reviewed all the camera footage from the day before, and there it was clear as day. One of the same guys who trespassed on my property earlier that week was captured again, sneaking toward the shed. After sundown, a few minutes later, A bright flash lit up the entire screen. Explosion. I backed it up screen, recorded everything, and emailed it to both my lawyer and a close friend at the U.S. Marshal's office. I knew better than to handle this alone, because now this was arson on federal property. There was no longer just an HOA issue, it was a criminal investigation. The next morning, I filed a full report with the sheriff's department. The deputy who came out, young guy named Rob, looked like he wasn't sure what to make of the whole thing until I showed him my credentials. He blinked. "You're a federal judge," I nodded. That shed wasn't just sitting on my land. It was sitting on the same parcel listed in the National Historical Registry, and they tore down the bridge to get to it. Rob scratched his head and radioed his supervisor. By noon, my ranch was crawling with state police. The bomb squad came out to confirm what I already knew. It had been intentional. I didn't need to say a word to the press. The story was writing itself. Still, I hadn't heard a word from the HOA. Not a phone call, not a letter. Nothing. It was the calm before the storm. A few days past, the ashes of the shed were still fresh, but I was rebuilding with cameras installed at every angle of the ranch. Now I wasn't taking any chances. Martin had gone into town for supplies when I got a knock at the door. It was a man in a dark gray suit, clipboard in hand. "Good morning. You must be Mr. Carter." I stepped onto the porch. "That's Judge Carter to you." He smiled, not fazed. "I'm from the Lakeside Ridge Association. I was sent to formally introduce a zoning proposal." I crossed my arms. "You came to my private property to introduce what?" He flicked a page. "The HOA is expanding as part of the new residential plan. We are seeking to include surrounding lands into the zoning district. This includes your ranch." I laughed loud, the kind of laugh that makes the other person shift uncomfortably. "You blew up my shed. You tore down a protected bridge. You trespassed at night. And now you're here asking me to join your little community." He kept his smile up, but his eyes twitched. "I assure you we weren't involved in any." I cut him off. "Save it. You can tell your boss that if one more foot steps on my land, I'll drag your entire board into federal court." His smile vanished. We were hoping to avoid legal action. "Too late," I said, and shut the door in his face. I watched through the window as he stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back down the driveway. That same afternoon, Ed Branson, the smug vice president, finally reached out. I received an email, formal and full of legal jargon, but I knew what it really was: a weak attempt to cover their tracks. It read, "Due to recent misunderstandings between our compliance division and local residents, we are offering a community-wide meeting to resolve any disputes in a civil and neighborly fashion." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to the U.S. Attorney's Office, along with my case file. Let them dig into it now. But then came the unexpected move. 2 nights later, while reviewing court dockets on my laptop, my internet cut out. I figured it was a storm rolling in, but when I checked my phone's hotspot, it worked fine. Curious, I walked outside. That's when I saw it, a crew of workers, all in yellow vests, standing by the ranch's telephone pole. They were lowering what looked like a booster box into the back of a truck. I ran down the hill. "Hey, what are you doing?" One guy, clearly the lead, looked up. "Oh, we're here from Ridgem, the HOA service provider, just pulling out equipment." I frowned. That booster was installed by my provider, not Ridgem. He blinked. "We were told this was part of the HOA's extended coverage zone." I showed him my parcel ID and the land boundary map on my phone. "This isn't HOA property, and this equipment isn't yours. You're stealing it." He turned pale. Then I asked the one question that knocked the wind out of him. "Who gave you permission to enter?" He stammered. We got a call from the association office. Said it was pre-approved." I pulled out my phone and began filming. "You just admitted to removing private property based on an order from someone who didn't own it. That's theft." He tried to wave it off. said it was a misunderstanding then, climbed into the truck and left with his crew, but the damage had already been done. They were trying to push me off my land, not just physically, but now digitally. They wanted control over every inch of the property, water, land, communication, and I wasn't about to let it happened. The next morning I filed another complaint. This time I attached the video, the witness statement, the HOA's false zoning proposal, the map of the property, the footage from the explosion, the photos of the trespassers. It was becoming a case study in HOA overreach. And yet the very next day, Martin returned from town with a letter. Judge, you better look at this. I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded notice, big red stamp across the top, notice of property foreclosure intent. The HOA had filed a lien on my land. They claimed back dues, violation fines, and late penalties adding up to over $27,000. All of it was fake, all of it fabricated, and all of it illegal. But what made my stomach twist was the last line: if payment is not received within 30 days, HOA has right to initiate seizure of property as per community standards. They were trying to take my ranch, my family's home, the place my father built and my grandfather protected. That night, as the wind howled across the empty place where the bridge used to be, I sat on the porch, boots up on the railing, watching the stars, and I whispered under my breath, "You wanted a war fine." I stood up, walked inside, and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I pulled out the envelope. I had been saving for a moment like this. Inside was a sealed order signed by me, but ready to be executed by someone else. An order for a federal injunction. I picked up my phone and called the one man who could make it happen, Marshall Wilkins. I said, "You still got that empty docket for property disputes?" "Yeah." Why? I smiled, because I just found the case of the year. Marshall Wilkins didn't hesitate. "Send everything you've got," he said. "I'll open the file first thing in the morning." I emailed the full report. Every bit of it: the illegal bridge demolition, the arson, the trespassing, the attempted digital theft, and now the fabricated foreclosure notice. By the time the sun rose, my case was on the federal docket with an expedited order for injunction. It was official now. HOA wasn't just being investigated for nuisance behavior. They were being investigated for a string of federal offenses. Still, I didn't go public. Let them keep digging their hole. Let them think they were winning. I wanted them blind. When the hammer dropped 3 days later, I got a call from a woman named Hannah Thomas, an investigator from the Department of Justice. "We've reviewed your file," she said, her voice firm but respectful. "I'll be personally taking the lead on this. Would you be available for a site inspection this week?" "I'll be here," I said. "And Judge," she added, "we've already opened a multi-agency task force on HOA overreach nationwide. Yours might just be the first case we bring to court." That same day, Martin and I walked the property together. The place felt different, now tense, like it was holding its breath. "What are they going to do when they find out who you are?" Martin asked, running his hand along the new trail cam post. "I'm hoping it's already too late for them to do anything," I replied. Then I paused. There was a car parked just down the dirt road outside my gate. Inside was a folded notice, big red stamp across the top, notice of property foreclosure intent. The HOA had filed a lien on my land. They claimed back dues, violation fines, and late penalties adding up to over $27,000. All of it was fake, all of it fabricated, and all of it illegal. But what made my stomach twist was the last line: if payment is not received within 30 days, HOA has right to initiate seizure of property as per community standards. They were trying to take my ranch, my family's home, the place my father built and my grandfather protected. That night, as the wind howled across the empty place where the bridge used to be, I sat on the porch, boots up on the railing, watching the stars, and I whispered under my breath, "You wanted war fine." I stood up, walked inside, and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I pulled out the envelope I had been saving for a moment like this. Inside was a sealed order signed by me, but ready to be executed by someone else. An order for a federal injunction. I picked up my phone and called the one man who could make it. Happened Marshall Wilkins. I said, you still got that empty docket for property. Disputes? Yeah, why, I smiled, because I just found the case of the year Marshall Wilkins didn't hesitate send everything you've got. He said, I'll open the file. First thing in the morning, I emailed the full report. Every bit of it, the illegal bridge demolition, the arson, the trespassing, the attempted digital theft, and now the fabricated foreclosure notice. By the time the sun rose, my case was on the federal docket with an expedited order. For injunction, it was official. Now the HOA wasn't just being investigated for nuisance behavior, they were being investigated for a string of federal offenses. Still, I didn't go public. Let them keep digging their hole. Let them think they were winning. I wanted them blind. When the hammer dropped 3 days later, I got a call from a woman named Hannah Thomas, an investigator from the Department of Justice. We've reviewed your file, she said, her voice firm but respectful. I'll be personally taking the lead on this. Would you be available for a site inspection this week? I'll be here, I said. And Judge, she added, we've already opened a multi-agency task force on HOA. Overreach nationwide. Yours might just be the first case we bring to court. That same day, Martin and I walked the property together. The place felt different, now tense, like it was holding its breath. What are they going to do when they find out who you are? Martin is running his hand along the new trail camp post. I'm hoping it's already too late for them to do anything, I replied. Then I paused. There was a car parked just down the dirt road outside my gate, not moving, just sitting there. Engine idling. I narrowed my eyes. Martin noticed it too, at the same white sedan we saw last week. I nodded without a word. We got into my truck and drove slowly toward it. As we approached, the driver suddenly stepped on the gas and sped off in the opposite direction, tires kicking up clouds of dust. I memorized the license plate. This wasn't paranoia anymore. They were watching me. I called the sheriff's office, reported the plate, and within hours got a call back. It's registered to Ridgem. The deputy said that was the HOA's partnered internet service, the same one that tried to remove my equipment without permission. They weren't just expanding, they were surveilling me. And for the first time since this all started, I felt something cold and ugly creeping in. They were scared, but scared people don't always act smart. Sometimes they act desperate. A few days later, I got a visit, not from a marshal, not from law enforcement, but from an HOA board member I'd never seen before. Older man, heavy set, graying at the temples. He didn't come in a Ridgecon truck. He didn't wear a suit. He came in an old pickup alone. I met him at the gate. He didn't speak right away, just looked over my land, hands in his jacket pockets. I tried to stop this, he said. Finally, too late. I replied, I told Ed this wasn't right, that tearing down that bridge would wake a sleeping bear. I didn't say anything. He didn't know the man added, looking at me now, didn't know who you were. I crossed my arms. And you think that makes it better? No, he said softly, just makes it stupider. He pulled a folded envelope from his pocket and handed it to me. He asked me to deliver this. I opened it. Inside was a check. $5,000, a settlement offer, handwritten on a piece of HOA stationery. I laughed. $5,000 for a bridge protected by federal law. The memory of 3 generations, a torched shed, and a fake foreclosure. He looked embarrassed. I told him it wouldn't work. You are right. He nodded, once turned, and walked back to his truck without another word. The next morning, federal investigators arrived. 3 black SUVs pulled into my drive. Hannah Thomas stepped out first, her badge clipped to her belt. Judge Carter. She greeted me. We are here to do a full walkthrough and gather physical evidence for the next 6 hours. I gave them a tour of the land, starting at the Destroyed bridge site, the charred remains of the shed, the boundary markers, the telecom box, and the signs the HOA had knocked over. They photographed, measured, and logged everything. When we reached the far end of the property, Hannah knelt beside one of the removed telecom poles and pointed. At the base, looks like they didn't just unplug the equipment. She said they drilled into the ground. That's tampering with private infrastructure. She looked up at me. They're done. I didn't smile. I just nodded because I knew what was coming next. But then, like clockwork, the HOA made their biggest mistake. Yet that evening, as I walked out to the barn to lock up, I noticed my cattle weren't where they usually were. I looked out across the pasture and my heart stopped. The back gate of the north pasture was open, wide open. That gate led straight to the old gravel road that wound toward the forest, and Highway Martin came running. They're gone. The herd's out. We jumped into the truck and drove for miles, lights sweeping across the trees and pastures, trying to track them down. We found them, thankfully, most of them anyway, milling near the edge of the woods. Confused and restless, we rounded them up, slowly, taking nearly 2 hours to bring them back. And when we returned to the gate, I saw it. The chain had been cut. Someone had intentionally released my cattle. It wasn't just property damage now. They were threatening lives, mine, Martin's, the animals. This was no longer HOA foolishness. This was personal. I filed another report. I called Hannah, and I placed a federal alert for property sabotage. But deep down I knew they wouldn't stop until they were stopped. I stood in the middle of the ranch that night, looking out over the dark horizon, the air still buzzing with heat from the day, and I made the final decision. No more defense, no more waiting. It was time to take this fight to them. Court cameras and everything in between. They tried to bury me in paperwork and liens, but they forgot I was the one who wrote the rules, and the gavel was about to drop 2 weeks later. The courtroom was packed, not just with lawyers and reporters, but with homeowners, people from the HOA itself, curious neighbors, even a few of the ranchers who lived further out and had nothing to do with Lakeside Ridge. Word had spread like wildfire that the federal judge from out past the creek was suing an HOA, and not just for a broken rule or petty fine, but for arson, trespassing, illegal demolition of a protected structure, and attempted seizure of land through fraudulent liens. Everyone wanted to see how it would unfold, but before the hearing began, I sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, no robe, just a simple suit, watching as Ed Bronson swaggered into the courtroom with 3 attorneys trailing him. He looked confident, maybe even smug, the same smirk from that day in the HOA office was plastered across his face. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. Still didn't know the storm. He'd walked into the judge presiding over the case, an old colleague of mine named Judge Janet Miller, stepped in and nodded at me briefly before calling the court to order. This is case number 441 F. J. Carter versus Lakeside Ridge Association. The moment had arrived. The trial wasn't going to be over in a day, but the first hearing was crucial. It was where the judge would rule on the motion for an emergency injunction, essentially freezing the HOA's actions before they could file more liens, send more letters, or lay another finger on my land. My lawyer, Ethan Grant, a calm, sharp guy from D.C., stood up and opened with a clear, measured tone. Your Honor, the HOA not only violated zoning boundaries and demolished a federally protected bridge, but they committed multiple criminal acts against a private citizen under the mistaken belief that he had no legal power to fight back. What they failed to realize is that Judge Carter is a federal judge, and his land is not under their authority, nor will it ever be. Ed's lead attorney stood to object, calling the statement inflammatory. Judge Miller shut him down with a wave. I'll allow it. Continue. Ethan laid out everything: the video footage of the men who trespassed, the emails, the demolition photos, the signed property boundary maps, the recording of the Ridgecon workers admitting they had no legal authorization The burnt remains of the shed, the surveillance footage of the open pasture gate, and finally copies of the false foreclosure notice. By the time he was done, the courtroom was silent. All eyes turned to the defense. Ed's lawyer stood and tried to spin it. Your Honor, while we understand the emotions involved, we believe this is a miscommunication. The association had reason to believe Mr. Carter's land was under expansion jurisdiction. A clerical error on an outdated map was to blame. Janet Miller arched an eyebrow. A clerical error that led to an explosive incident and a fraudulent lien. There was no good answer to that. The defense stumbled through another 10 minutes before the judge raised her hand. I've heard enough for today, she said firmly. Based on evidence provided, this court grants an immediate injunction against the Lakeside Ridge HOA effective immediately. You are to cease all actions involving Mr. Carter's property, including financial claims, digital access, and physical trespass. Any further contact will be considered a direct violation of federal order. Ed's smirk cracked. Reporters scrambled to get quotes. Homeowners murmured. But I just stood up, nodded at the judge, and walked out quietly. That was just the beginning. By the next day, my story hit the news. Ho faces federal lawsuit from judge over destroyed bridge fraud arson. People from all over the country started sharing their own HOA horror stories. Homeowners emailed me, veterans, elderly, widows, single parents. They'd been harassed, fined, even threatened with foreclosure over flowers, flags, fences, and garden beds. My lawsuit became the rallying point. But while the country watched, the HOA fought back in silence. 2 nights later, Martin and I were repairing a busted gate hinge near the northern boundary when we heard tires rolling slow over gravel. A black SUV came into view. No plates. It didn't belong to law enforcement. It stopped just outside the fence line. Martin reached for the rifle in the tool rack. I held out a hand. Not yet. The driver's window rolled down, and a man leaned out. Maybe mid-40s, clean-shaven, well-dressed, with a stare that didn't match his polished look. You're making a lot of noise for someone who lives so quiet, he said. I stepped forward. Who are you? He smiled faintly. A friend of the association. Thought you might want to talk off the record. Martin stood next to me. Now you threatening the judge? The man chuckled. I'm just saying it'd be better for everyone if this whole thing went away. People don't like mess. I took one slow step closer to the fence. Let me tell you something, friend. I was trained to spot liars, trained to dissect testimony, and trained to read people's faces when they try to hide fear. You're afraid right now, and you should be. The man's smile faded. He said nothing else, just rolled up the window and drove away. That night, I filed a formal report with Hannah and the task force. We weren't dealing with just HOA board members anymore. They had outside help, possibly private contractors, maybe even someone connected to a larger real estate development group. I knew there were vultures looking to turn land like mine into subdivisions, but they were going to have to get past me first, and that wasn't going to happen. The next morning I hosted a press conference, not to grandstand, not to play politics, just to tell the truth. Standing in front of the scorched remains of the shed, I looked into the cameras and spoke calmly. This isn't just about my bridge or my land. This is about how unchecked power corrupts small systems meant to serve people. The HOA in my area destroyed history, broke laws, and committed crimes because they believed no one would stop them. They thought no one could, but someone could, and someone did. By the next day, leadership started resigning. First the treasurer, then the secretary, then 2 board members. All of them stepped down quietly. No statements, no emails, just gone. Only Ed Branson remained, and I knew why, because Ed wasn't just the head of the HOA. He was also tied to a real estate company looking to develop the surrounding lands. The whole takeover of my property, it was part of a larger plan to turn this area into a modern, smart community. That's why they wanted my bridge gone, why they tried to control My internet, why they filed the lien, why they cut the gate, it was all about the land, but Ed had pushed too far too fast, and now his name was on a federal subpoena. Still, I didn't celebrate yet, because I hadn't gotten my bridge back. And without that bridge, the land didn't feel whole, so I made a decision. I called up a team of builders I'd worked with during a historic courthouse restoration years back. We're going to rebuild it. I said exactly how it was. They agreed, but halfway through laying the foundation logs, we discovered something buried under the old bridge site, a rusted metal box, sealed shut, buried deep beneath where the support beam had stood. Inside, blueprints from 1947 signed by my grandfather, with a note attached to my sons and grandsons. May this bridge always keep our family connected, no matter what storms try to tear it down. I stood there in silence. Martin put a hand on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, I let a tear fall, not for the destruction, but for the legacy, because no matter what they tore down, they could never destroy that. Construction began before sunrise every morning. The rebuilding of the bridge wasn't just a project, it became a mission. Word had spread across the county, and what started as a small crew quickly grew. Local ranchers brought tools, retired carpenters offered to volunteer, even a group of high school students from the town's shop class showed up one Saturday with their teacher, eager to be part of history. This wasn't just a bridge anymore. It had become a symbol. People from all over the area came to see it take shape. Some brought food, others just came to shake my hand and say, "Give them hell, Judge." They'd seen the headlines, they'd seen the corruption, and now they wanted justice, not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been bullied by a homeowners association with too much power and too little accountability. By week 2, the frame was up. We used the same style wood, same design as the original. Every plank, every nail was placed with care. We even carved my grandfather's note into a bronze plaque and set it at the center of the new handrail. To my sons and grandsons, may this bridge always keep our family connected, no matter what storms try to tear it down. But while the community came together, the pressure behind the scenes was building. The Department of Justice had officially launched a multi-state investigation into HOA. His mine was the catalyst. Cases from Arizona, Georgia, Texas, and Florida began flooding in, people sharing similar stories of abuse and unlawful property grabs. And as the news tightened around Ed Branson's neck, he finally made his move. Late one night, I was in the barn repairing a broken gate when Martin burst in, out of breath, "You need to come outside." Now we ran out to the ridge where the bridge was nearly finished, and my heart sank. 3 large construction machines, graders, bulldozers, sat idling just yards away from the build site. Their flood lights illuminated the bridge, casting long shadows across the creek. Behind them stood Ed, no hard hat, no shame, just that same cocky smirk. I marched up, fury boiling beneath the surface. "You've got 5 seconds to get those machines off my land." Ed raised a walkie to his lips. "Don't move," he told the driver. Then he turned to me. "You built without a permit. It's a safety hazard. I have every right. You have no rights here." I snapped that. "Land doesn't belong to your HOA." Ed held out a folder. We refiled our district maps. "Your land was mistakenly omitted from our original development zone, but it's been corrected. We filed it with the county this morning." I snatched the folder from his hand and flipped through it, just as I expected. Fake survey documents, backdated paperwork, signatures I knew weren't legit. "You just committed forgery," said coldly. Ed shrugged. "We'll see what the county says. The board already approved it." Martin stepped between us. Fists clenched. "You better leave before someone gets hurt." Ed didn't flinch. He looked around at the bridge, the volunteers, the reporters, who had started gathering again by the fence. "You're not going to win," he said, turning to me. "Even if you get your bridge, your land is next. We'll find a way sooner or later. People like you fold." I stared him dead in the eyes. "I'm not folding," I said. "I'm setting the table." Just then headlights swept across the road. 2 black SUVs pulled up. Fast federal marshals stepped out. One of them was Marshal Wilkins himself. "Mr. Branson," he said calmly, flashing his badge, "you're under arrest for trespassing on protected land and attempting to interfere with the federal investigation." Ed's jaw dropped. "Wait, what? This is private property." "Exactly," Weiland said. Within minutes, Ed was in cuffs, screaming about lawyers and corruption and how he'd sue every last one of us. He was still yelling when they drove him away. The machines were removed. The crew returned to work the next morning, but just when I thought it was over, I got a call from Hannah. "Thomas Judge Carter, we've uncovered something. You may want to sit down." I did. "What is it?" We traced the HOA's funding records. A large portion of their operating budget isn't from dues or fines. It's from an offshore development firm based out of Miami, one that specializes in hostile takeovers of rural land for luxury communities. I clenched my jaw. "You're saying this was never about the HOA?" "Exactly," she said. "They were being used. Ed was the front man, but the real money is behind the scenes." That explained everything. The harassment, the surveillance, the sabotage. They were trying to force me out, to devalue the property, claim foreclosure, and flip the land for a massive profit. And they were still out there. Hannah continued. "We've frozen their accounts, but these guys are slick. They might retaliate in other ways. We need you to stay alert." "I will," I promised. But the attack didn't come with fire, or fake fines, or even lawyers. It came through the sky a week later, as the bridge neared final completion. A low-flying drone buzzed across the ranch, then another, then 4 more. They hovered over the fields, the barn, even the house. One of them zoomed dangerously close to Martin's truck, nearly crashing into the windshield. I reported it immediately. The FIA issued a cease and desist to the suspected drone operators. But the problem didn't stop, so I built something. An old-school solution, a simple hand-cranked anti-drone net launcher. Every time one flew low enough, we'd snag it, bag it, and hand it over to the feds. We captured 7 drones in total. Each one was linked to a shell company tied to the same offshore firm that had funded the HOA. But it didn't matter anymore, because the bridge was finished on a cool Sunday morning, with dozens of neighbors, friends, and reporters gathered. We held a small ceremony. I stepped onto the new bridge, Martin by my side, and placed a single nail into the final beam, painted gold and engraved with the date. Then we lowered the American flag from the barn rafters and raised it proudly over the bridge. Cheers echoed across the creek. People clapped, hugged, even cried. And for a moment, just one shining moment, it all felt worth it. But just as we were wrapping up, a black car pulled up at the edge of the property. A man in a dark blazer stepped out, holding a briefcase. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He simply walked up to me and handed over a letter. "What's this?" I asked. He tilted his head. "An offer," he said. "One you'll want to read carefully." Then he walked away without another word. I unfolded the paper. At the top, the name of a major development company. Below it, a number they wanted to buy the ranch for millions. But I didn't even blink. I folded the letter once and tossed it into the creek, because some things aren't for sale. Not bridges, not land, not legacy, and definitely not justice. The offer in that letter was more than just a number. It was bait. Test to see if I'd cash out and walk away. After everything I'd fought to protect, they dangled millions in front of me like I was just another landowner who could be bought, as if burning down my shed, trespassing on my land, releasing my cattle, and destroying a historic bridge was just business. But I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for something they didn't understand: pride, history, justice. I didn't bother to respond to the offer. The creek had already swallowed the answer, and I made sure the federal task force received copies of everything: the drone interference, the offer letter, the name of the real estate development firm behind the HOA. Within days, federal subpoenas went out to multiple states, investigations opened into shell companies, dummy corporations, and board members who had quietly stepped down, and while Ed Branson sat behind bars, awaiting his arraignment, the deeper players, the ones who had tried to stay hidden, were being dragged into the light. Hatbridge, once a simple wooden pass across a shallow stream, had become a symbol of something far bigger than me, and now the war was coming to an end, but not without one final strike. It came quietly one morning while feeding the cattle. Noticed a drone again, but this time it didn't hover or scan, it dropped. Something, a small black device with a blinking red light. Martin nearby saw it. "Two, is that what I think it is?" he asked, already reaching for the radio. We moved cautiously toward it, and when we got close enough, I recognized what it was. Not a bomb, but a tracker. They were still trying to monitor us, still trying to get an edge, and that meant only one thing: someone on the inside was still leaking information. The federal team swept the area again. Hannah returned personally, and after a full forensic sweep, they found two more devices, one planted inside the barn's weather vane and another beneath the ATV's dashboard. We were being watched from every angle. "You're still the keystone to this whole case," she told me, arms crossed, as she looked out across the pasture. "They know if they can rattle you, everything else might fall apart." "But they're wrong," I said. She nodded. "Good, because we're ready to drop the hammer." That week the DOJ made their move. A massive press release went out listing the HOA and their developers as the targets of a federal RICO investigation: racketeering, fraud, attempted land seizure, mail fraud, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The news broke everywhere. HOA targeted in RICO case. Federal judge's property at center of national sting. People cheered. Emails flooded in. Former HOA victims from across the U.S. thanked me. Some cried in messages. Others sent photos of their own battles, homes they nearly lost, gardens bulldozed, pets removed, flags taken down, and the best part, Congress stepped in. Legislators proposed the Homeowner Fairness Act, requiring third-party federal oversight of HOAs with over 100 properties and mandating criminal liability for any unlawful property seizures, all because of a little bridge. And the people who thought they could tear it down without consequence. But the real victory came quietly, right here at home. The sun was setting on the ranch. The air was cool, and the creek whispered softly under the brand new bridge. Martin and I stood by the fence sipping sweet tea, watching the cattle graze like they always had. "You ever think about selling?" he asked, half joking. I smiled. "They offered me enough to buy 10 more ranches." He raised an eyebrow, and I looked at the bridge, sturdy, proud, beautiful. In the amber light, I wouldn't trade this land for all the gold in Texas. We laughed, the kind of deep, peaceful laugh that comes when the fight is finally over. Later that night, I got a call from Judge Miller Carter. She said they plead guilty, the whole board and the developers too. A full sweep, you win. I thanked her, hung up, and stared out the window for a long time. The stars were bright. Over the bridge, the land was quiet. Peace had returned, not because I screamed the loudest or fought the dirtiest, but because I stood my ground, didn't fold, and in doing so, I reminded everyone watching that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, you don't mess with a man's legacy, and you sure don't tear down his bridge.